Junior Assembly. This is Martin Luther King Jr. Assembly. Alright, so I'm glad everybody's in a good mood. Glad you brought your sense of humor with you. For the Martin Luther King Assemblies, each year we try to look at human rights and the dignity of the human person from a different perspective. The reason we honor Martin Luther King is because he was not just a leader for human rights in the United States, but he was a leader for human rights throughout the world. And as men for others, young men who are in training to be men for others, if you really look at the definition of what it means to be a man for others, it means that as a community, we are committed to trying to create a world where the dignity of the human person is at the center of the kind of world we want to be involved with. It's about creating a world that's more equitable, more fair, more just. And that's what it means to be a man for others. It's being committed to a world based on justice, equity, and the authentic value of the human person. So this year we have Mr. Luis Valencia, who's class of 1981, and in immigration, 82, I'm sorry. Should clap. That was the first mistake I've made all year. So my sense of humor isn't as good as yours. All right. So here we go. So we have a nice program that's scheduled for you today. At the end of Mr. Valencia's talk, you're going to have a chance to ask him some questions. So there'll be some microphones. And at the end of the Q&A, Hands Across Campus has 4 or 5 other programs scheduled for the month of February and March, and there'll be some optional little flyers for you to have at the end if you want to participate in some more activities like this. So now I'd like to turn the mic over to Umar.
Thank you, gentlemen. Hope you guys too. Alright, so good afternoon. My name is Umar Durrani, as you probably already know. Hey. So welcome to our annual Martin Luther King Jr. Day Assembly, And so I'll be your MC. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Hands Across Campus itself and some of the major goals. So our first major goal is to be inclusive. You know, Martin Luther King Jr. throughout his whole adult life tried to create a society in which everybody feels included, regardless of their skin color, gender, anything like that. And I think Hands Across Campus tries to do the same thing at this very school. Our second goal is to keep different. Often when something's foreign to somebody, they'll tag it as bad, weird, or just stupid. But I think Hands Across Campus tries to celebrate it being different. And I think, as William Cowper tactfully put it, diversity is the spice of life. He actually said variety is the spice of life, but that's not a big deal. Without wasting any more of your time, I'm going to hand over the mic to Brandon Phillips, and he's going to introduce Mr. Valencia.
Hi, my name is Brandon Phillips. It is both my honor and privilege today to welcome one of our fellow brothers who has kept true to the blue line and lives the motto, man for and with others. Just as you or I, Mr. Luis Valencia was inspired by one of his religion classes junior year at St. Xavier, and remembers saying, "If not me, then who?" He answered the call and put these words into action after becoming a real estate lawyer climbing the ladder of success. Luis Valencia saw many people mistreated in the court and heard many dehumanizing stereotypes about immigration. and has moved to do something about it. Luis Valencia was raised bilingual and was very proud of his Colombian heritage. He was born on January 16, 1964, the same year that Martin Luther King Jr. received the Nobel Peace Prize. He is a proud Buckeye, as some of you will be, celebrating the CFP Championship, where he received his bachelor's degree at The Ohio State University and his Juris Doctor degree at the University of Toledo. He became president of the Latin Coalition of Southwest Ohio, member of the National Immigration Project, member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, wrote and conducted immigration seminars, president of Pan American Society, and leader in Greater Cincinnati. He is currently president of Aleja Properties and is married to Gloria Valencia. They are both proud parents of Alexandra and Luis Eduardo Valencia. Someday, hopefully, St. X brother, and resides in Cincinnati, Ohio right now. As Martin Luther King Jr., Luis Valencia understands that the American dream should be attainable to all, and that he sees his role as vital to help the Spanish-speaking immigrants realize their full potential. He promotes Dr. King's vision of the beloved kingdom, the work that people of God will work together to build just community based on love, fertility, and righteousness. We all are invited to join this community, built on the virtues of life, liberty, and happiness. What gifts and talents will you bring to make this dream a reality? Please join me in welcoming Mr. Luis Valencia.
All right, I'm not very good at standing in one place, so I'm going to pull this out and hopefully be able to walk around without killing myself. Okay. You know, it's pretty amazing to be back here. It's more than just pretty amazing. It is incredibly amazing for me to be back here. It's quite an honor. You know, spent 4 years in this great high school, and I remember what it was like to be a senior, being on top of Mount Olympus and feeling like I was a god almost here. It was quite a feeling, and I'm very jealous that you guys are experiencing that right now, and I hope you enjoy every second of it, and as I'm sure you've enjoyed the 4 years that you've been here, that you'll continue to enjoy your life in the university. You know, when I was asked to be here to speak about this, I had to really think about if I deserve to be here, and I really don't deserve to be here. But I can tell you my story, I can tell you what I went through, so that you can then make a decision about what it is that you want to do with your lives. And I'm not talking about whether you want to be a doctor, an attorney, an engineer, or anything like that, because that is the money that you take home to pay the bills, to marry, to have children, to educate them. But that's not who you're going to be. That's just how you're going to earn your money. Who you're going to be is the decision that you still have to make. And although at this moment maybe it seems like a pretty easy decision because you're in a school that tells you how we're all supposed to think, once you leave the confines of this school and you go to a university, large or small, you're going to start to meet and be with a lot of people that weren't brought up this way, that weren't taught the things that you were taught, that never heard about men for others. And then you're going to have to start to decide how you're going to speak, what kind of person you're going to be. When I was here at St. X, I didn't start out that intelligent. You know, I was a freshman. What did I know? I was a nerd just like most other freshmen that came in here. For those of you that felt that you were super cool, that's fine. And I will tell you that one of the first days that I was here, a friend of mine from my grade school was a tiny little guy. He's running up the steps, and this other guy, who I had no idea who he was running behind him. But the other guy seemed like he was a lot tougher than my little friend. So I reached out to grab this guy to stop him from chasing after my friend. I didn't know if he was going to hit him or what he was going to do, and I ended up accidentally grabbing him by his shirt and ripped the entire shirt off of him. He was not very happy. We almost got into a fist fight. Ended up back then in the assistant principal's office, Mr. Meyer. and had a long conversation. Needless to say, he and I did not start off on a good foot, and we were not friends. He was from Korea, and as you were told in the introduction, I'm Colombian. It took 2 years until our junior year, when we were sitting in a computer programming class, and we looked around and we realized that everybody else in the class was more of a nerd or more of an idiot than we thought each other was. We began to talk to each other, and we became best friends. His name is Matt, and to this day, he is still my best friend in the world. And whenever I have a question, whenever I have a doubt about life, I call him up and we talk. Great guy. Wish he was here today. So, how did I end up in this situation, or what ended up bringing me to this thought? You know, this is about Martin Luther King, and Martin Luther King is, I have a dream. And I wonder how many of you have actually taken the time to listen to that speech, because when he talks about I have a dream, he's talking about that he has a dream that we will someday live up to the words of the Declaration of Independence in this country, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That was the phrase that this country was founded upon, but the founding fathers didn't really mean it, did they? I mean, after all, women weren't considered to be equal to men. They couldn't vote, they couldn't own property, they couldn't do a lot of things. Blacks were certainly not considered to be equal to men because they weren't men, they were chattel, they were property. Bought, sold, do whatever you want with them. And as we've gone through the history of this country, we have proven over and over again that we don't believe those words. One of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, was the first anti-immigrant because he wanted to create an immigration law that would ban Germans from coming to this country because Pennsylvania was being overrun by the Germanic tribe, and if we didn't stop them, we were all going to end up speaking German. Obviously that did not come into law, and that did not pass. But it has continued to happen since then, whether it's about the Chinese, whether it's about the Irish. We have distrusted, hated, disliked, not wanted one group after another in our country. It took almost 150 years, 130 years for women to finally gain the right to vote. It took 100 years for black men to be made free. It took almost 200 years for them to earn the right to vote, and we are still fighting these same fights over and over again about whether all men are created equal. And that exact same thought is the same thing that Jesus Christ was about. And that is what Martin Luther King was talking about, is that we are all equal. We all have a right to be respected, a right to be heard, a right to speak. And his dream was that someday we would actually live up to that right, but we haven't yet. You know, I was born and raised in Cincinnati. I went to Summit Country Day School, then I came to St. X. And I gotta tell you, if anybody asked me about Cincinnati, I would have said Cincinnati is a great place to raise a family. It's a little boring, a little conservative, but it's a great place to raise a family. Good jobs, low cost of living, great education, and everything's wonderful. And when I was doing real estate law and making more money than I could count, I sat down one day and spoke to a woman. She was black, she worked at a bank. She was from Toledo, Ohio, where I had just come from after finishing law school. And we were talking, and she was talking about how racist it is here in Cincinnati. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Seriously? When? Where? I don't see it. I mean, granted, when I was growing up, I'd have the occasional idiot here at St. X or at Summit or anywhere else along the road who would call me a spick or would hold out a little handkerchief and go, Toro, Toro. Okay. But that was just an idiot, right? I mean, the guy has a low IQ, you know, lack of maturity, whatever it might be, but that's not really racism. That's not really discrimination because it's not really hatred. It's just stupidity. I'm okay with that. And she told me how, you know, that it was terrible here, that she's always taught her son that if the police ever pulled him over, the very first thing he needs to do is get his hands up in the air or out the window where the police officer can see them, to not give the police officer any excuse to believe that he's doing something wrong. And I was like, wow. I'm like, you know, I've never experienced that here in Cincinnati. I said, now I will tell you, when I was in Toledo, they were incredibly racist towards the Hispanic community. And I told her about the experiences I'd had up in Toledo, and she was from Toledo. And And she's like, oh wow, I've never experienced that in Toledo. Toledo to me is very accepting. But she's black, I'm Hispanic. In Toledo, they were bad towards Hispanics. I'm Hispanic, she's black. In Cincinnati, apparently they were bad towards blacks. I didn't know any of this stuff. And I would have Hispanics show up at my law office time after time and say, you know, because of my name, can you represent me in this case? Can you help me with this matter? And I would always say, no, you know, I don't do that kind of law. I'm doing real estate law. I'll send you to this person. I'll send you to this other person. And I would get complaints back that that person doesn't really speak Spanish. That person's not bilingual. That person didn't understand them, didn't listen to them. They felt discriminated against. They felt whatever they felt. And I always thought that it was the person that was just exaggerating. You know, nobody likes attorneys. Of course he's going to complain about the attorney I send him to. Until finally, this happened about 10 years ago, roughly, up in the city of Hamilton, there was a Mexican gentleman about 28 years old who kidnapped and brutally raped this 9-year-old girl. And after he did that, Sheriff Jones up in Butler County started this massive campaign against illegal aliens. But it really wasn't against illegal aliens, it was against immigrants. And it wasn't really against immigrants, it was against Hispanics. And it really wasn't about Hispanics, it was about Mexicans, because after all, in Cincinnati, 9 out of 10 people will tell you the only people that speak Spanish in the world are the Mexicans. Not very educated outside of St. X. So I had a gentleman come to me and told me that he had a case up in Butler County and that, you know, they were discriminating against him and, you know, he was guilty before he could even prove his case and all this kind of stuff. And I'd sent him to another attorney and the other attorney told him there was no help for his case. And finally I said, okay, fine. I will take your case. If nothing else, just to show you that you are wrong, that it is not the way that you say it is. So I went to court. And in this particular court, they have what are called pre-trials. And pre-trial is an opportunity to discuss the merits of the case prior to going to trial. And every court is different. Every court has their own rules on how they do pre-trials. In this particular court, in those days, there would be a conference in the judge's chambers, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, and the judge. So the three of us were in the judge's chambers talking, and the judge and prosecutor had known me for years. They knew me as Louis Valencia. I have white skin, I speak perfect English, and I went into the judge's chambers, and I got to hear them talk about my client the way I have never in my life, in person, heard another human being speak about a human being. Because they weren't talking about him as if he was a human being. He was some Mexican. He was some guy who was illegally in this country, whether he was or whether he wasn't, which had nothing to do with the case. That's what they were focused on. That he was a drunk. There was nothing of alcohol in the charges, but after all Mexicans are drunks, right? And they just kept going on and on and on, talking about my client and all these stereotypes and all these racial epithets. I'd never heard somebody say to my face before, and I sat there in shock. I couldn't even speak. My jaw was to the floor because I'd never heard anyone speak that way in front of me. And it dawned on me that they hated me. They just didn't know it. Because they hated all Hispanics. They just didn't know I was Hispanic. The judge actually thought I was Italian. Apparently Valencia, he thinks, is Italian. And I left that courtroom in shock. And as I left, I called a friend of mine from here at St. X. Some of you guys may know him, Myron Kilgore. He's from my grade. And I called him up, because when I was here at St. X, and all my life, I always loved history. And I read a lot about the civil rights movement, and I read a lot about the Holocaust during World War II, and I was really into reading the readings of Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy, and everything having to do with civil rights I thought was very interesting, because again, I just couldn't believe that human beings had really ever treated other human beings as if they were nothing. Because of course that just didn't happen anymore, so how was that possible? And I remember calling Myron up and telling him what had just happened. I'd just gone through, what I'd experienced. I was crying. I couldn't contain myself because I just couldn't believe that kind of hatred, that kind of ignorance existed here in Cincinnati. And he said, the only thing you want to do is drive home and hug your kids, isn't it? And I said, yes, it is. And we talked for a good long time, and I did. I went home and I hugged my kids, and something you won't experience for many, many years, but for me, it was what saved me that day, because quite honestly, all of the negative, horrible feelings that I had washed away from me as I hugged my children. And I realized that racism, discrimination hasn't gone away. It is still here. It is around all of us. And that day I decided to change my practice. I went from doing real estate law to doing immigrant law. So I do immigration law and everything that affects your immigrant status or is affected by your immigrant status. And I've gone into one courtroom after another courtroom, and I've had judges and prosecutors and opposing counsel and politicians and everybody tell me about how bad these immigrants are. And you start to realize, if you just take the time to think about it, that it is that. And I'll give you a quick example. I went on a Channel 9 debate that they did with one of the county trustees up in Warren County, because they were trying to pass an ordinance up in Warren County that would not allow an individual born in Warren County to receive a U.S. birth certificate unless both of their parents were U.S. citizens. Now, on the surface, some of you go, well, that sounds reasonable to me, but let's take a look at two really important things. One, should be obvious to anybody that has any idea about the law, is that a county has no right, no ability to decide who gets a U.S. birth certificate or not. That's a federal law. So from that standpoint, sheer stupidity that they're wasting time and money to pass an ordinance regarding a U.S. birth certificate. But the sad part here, and the part that turns to the racism and discrimination, is that there is not one single birthing hospital in all of Warren County. Not one. No child will ever be born in Warren County unless the child pops out in the taxi before they get to the hospital. So then what is the point of passing this ordinance? It is just to show the voters that you're anti-immigrant. And this goes on every single day around us. All we have to do is open our eyes, watch, look, listen. And for those of you that are white males, you hear it more than probably anybody, because you are in places where people feel more secure in talking about it than anywhere else. Now that every judge and attorney in the greater Cincinnati area knows that I'm Colombian and that means I'm Hispanic, they never talk about those things in front of me anymore. They used to, but they don't anymore, because they know I will immediately call them on it. And that is the choice that you guys will have to make after you leave St. X. Because see, you've been told here that it is men for others. And that saying of men for others is about following the path of Jesus Christ. It's about following the example that Martin Luther King gave us, which is to ensure that every man has an equal right, an equal say. Treat them all the same. You may treat them all the same. What about your neighbor? And if your neighbor doesn't treat them all the same, is that okay? Are you going to allow that? Which then brings me to one of the greatest sayings that I always loved, which was the Lutheran father who, towards the end of World War II, wrote that poem that said, first they came for the socialists, and I said nothing because I was not a socialist. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I said nothing because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I said nothing because I was not Jewish. Then they came for me, and there was nobody left to say anything. All of my life, they'd come for other people. And I hadn't said anything because, quite honestly, I was too oblivious to see what was going on. I believed all of those things, but I didn't see it happening right in front of me until I was sitting in a judge's chambers and the words were smacking me in the face, and it was directed at me and my kind, or me and my client, or however you want to look at it. And ever since then, I decided to change the way I do things. So now I go around educating. Educate the judge, educate the prosecutor, opposing counsel, educate in schools. Anywhere that I'm given the opportunity to educate people about that we are all equal, that we all do have the same rights, that we are to be treated with respect and dignity at all times. And I come back to my days at St. X and remember about being meant for others, and I continue that. And I will tell you, I hope that each and every one of you will do that, but I won't be surprised if each and every one of you do not. Because just as I had very good friends at St. X, who I lean on today and who help me through these trying times, because it is very painful to hear when people hate you. The way our society, so much of our society, has turned on immigrants. Just as that has happened, I also had one friend from St. X who got tired of me talking and finally one day said, you know, if you don't like it here so much, why don't you go back to Columbia? And he was a St. X grad. So just because you graduate from here does not mean that you are guaranteed to be a good person. You've been taught how to be a good person. You've been taught how to be a fair person. You've been taught the word of Christ. You're learning about how Martin Luther King led that example. But it will be your choice once you leave these four walls about how you're going to live your life. And if you will lead it as men for others, or if you will allow yourself to fall into, I don't know, the dark side, the ones who stand idly by and say nothing as bad is done around you, I truly hope that all of you decide to speak up. Right now, I'm sure even some of you, as you're sitting here listening to this, probably realize that maybe even your parents or family members or some of the people that need to be educated about the way they think, about the way they feel. Well, it's going to be your choice whether or not you want to educate them, whether you want to talk to them, whether you want to stand up for what is right and tell them that all men are equal and that we do not judge people by their name, by the color of their skin, by the religion that they believe, by any aspect of them. You judge a man by the character of the man. And some people will hide behind, well, it's the law. Really? We've changed the law over and over again. As I said, the law was that blacks were chattel. We realized that was finally wrong, and we changed that. In Germany, the law was to take the Jewish possessions and kill them. Well, we changed that too. The law was that women could not vote. Well, we changed that too. We have changed laws when we know that they're wrong. That doesn't mean we change them for the right laws all the time, because there are certainly laws that we create that are wrong. But don't hide behind the words that it's the law. The only law we will have to all answer to eventually is going to come from God, not from Barack Obama, not from the Congress, not from the Republican GOP, okay? So you guys are going to have to decide how you want to live that. Yeah, I'm certainly ready to open up for questions. If somebody has a question, comment, concern.
Guys, there are two mics, but I'm not sure if the mics are working or not. So if you have a question, stand up, and we will bring you a mic, and Mr. Valencia will call it.
Go ahead, in the very back. Come on, guys.
Yeah, so you mentioned President Barack Obama.
Yes.
Shout out to him. Anyway, so what do you think about his immigration reform action that he's going to be taking regarding immigration?
Well, Barack Obama is the worst thing that ever happened to immigrants. But let me explain to you why. Let me explain to you why. Let me explain why. Let me explain why. And it is because, and it surely comes from being a hypocrite. And it's not just Barack Obama, it's the GOP as well. You know, they talk about the fact that this executive action is illegal. As a matter of fact, they want to try to sue him for it. What a bunch of idiots. But they want to sue him about the executive order that he gave on November 20th of last year. They don't want to sue him about the executive order he gave 7 years ago when he said that secure communities had to be rolled out throughout the entire country and had to be implemented mandatory. See, up until September 11, 2001, agencies like the FBI, the CIA, the jails didn't share information with each other. They thought it was too proprietary, you know, we couldn't share this kind of information. And President Bush said after 9/11, that it would have never happened if they shared information, so he created the concept of secure communities, which was an executive action by Bush. It was not a law. And in secure communities, all the agencies were going to share information, but Bush never rolled it out. Nobody rolled it out until Barack Obama took over. He rolled it out, and that is what has caused almost 400,000 immigrants per year to be deported. Now that may sound like a wonderful thing for those of you that are anti-immigrant, but I will also tell you that at the same time it has caused almost 15,000 US citizens to be illegally deported. 15,000 US citizens, because there is not a single individual in this room that could prove to me today that you are a US citizen. And because you cannot prove it, that means under secure communities you can be deported today. You get taken to a detention center, which is not a jail, even though it's in a jail. You have no right to a phone call because it's not a jail, you're not under arrest. You have no right to a free attorney because it's not a jail, you're not under arrest. And they move you around and then they deport you to another country. Lawsuits have already been filed against the government because of these 15,000 Americans that have been illegally deported, and payments have already been made by the US government to these US citizens that have been illegally deported. And Barack Obama could stop that like that because it is an executive order, not a law. Now, as far as what he's offered on November 20th to help some parents of US citizens, that's a nice thing. Thank God, it's about time, do something. Every single person that works in immigration, and I do mean every single person, the judges, the ICE officials, Customs Border Patrol, all of them know that immigration is a messed up system that does not work and needs to be fixed. And it was on its way to being fixed until the financial collapse occurred back in 2006, 2007. At that point, the GOP, the Democrats were in power, the GOP decided that immigrants were this horrible thing. And let's be honest, when they talk about immigrants, they only talk about Mexicans, right? Nobody ever talks about the Canadian border. By the way, every single terrorist from 9/11 came through the Canadian border. Nobody ever talks about the Chinese immigrants that are here illegally, the Russian immigrants that are here illegally. Yes, Mexicans make up the #1 population of undocumented immigrants in this country. Russians are the second. Okay? Not even close to any of the Central Americans or anybody else. Canadians are a huge amount. Nobody ever talks about that. All they talk about is Mexicans. Well, if you think about your history classes, you should remember that kings were always told, if there's trouble at home, make war on your neighbor. And in my opinion, that is exactly what the GOP has done. They have been losing in politics, and somebody came up with the brilliant idea to blame the Mexicans. It's always great if we can blame somebody else instead of ourselves for our problems, so they did that. In the meantime, the Democrats have been trying to pass something, some kind of immigration reform, but Barack Obama doesn't know what he's doing. He's horrible at it. You know, it's kind of like asking a poor man if I'm happy that you gave me a penny. Hey, it's better than nothing, but with a penny, what am I going to buy? And that's kind of what I feel about Barack Obama's executive order from November. Any other questions? Yes, sir. You say it, I'll repeat it.
All right. Do you think that with the current state of politics today, with how the government's been shutting down because the parties can't compromise with each other, do you think that that kind of leads to the fact that nothing's been done with immigration?
He's asking if the current state of affairs with the political parties that they can't agree on anything, if that's what's, and causing government shutdown, if that's going to prevent anything from being done in immigration. Absolutely. You know, the Republicans are stupid enough to think that they actually have a shot at retaking the White House with their anti-immigrant stance. And the truth of the matter is, whether you like it or not, this is the truth. We Hispanics, we make more babies than you white guys. And as a matter of fact, everybody that isn't white makes more babies than you white guys. So that is a problem, because that means we will have more votes than you guys. And you know, I can say it all very flippantly, but that is the truth. And the sad truth is that right now, the Republican government is catering to one group of people, and that is to the upper class white male. That's great. Okay? From an economic standpoint, I absolutely agree with the GOP. I will tell you that I've been Republican all my life until 7 years ago when the Republican Party fell off the deep end. The Democratic Party caters to everybody else. They cater to the poor, to the women, to the blacks, to the Hispanics, to the China, everybody else. It's just a matter of simple majority. I mean, I would love to see Republicans get back in authority from an economic standpoint, but first they got to screw their heads on right. They got to realize what they're doing, and what they're doing from a social standpoint is of no help to anybody. So I think the Republicans are in major trouble. Now, the fact that they won some seats in the Senate at the midterm elections, unfortunately, historically means nothing, because every poll, all of history will show you that the minorities do not come out at the midterm elections. We should, but we don't. But in another year and a half, when it's the presidential election, we'll come out. I mean, seriously, take a look at what's going on. You know, Romney, I mean, come on, really? We're going to build a moat, we're going to put alligators in it. Do you really think he has a shot at winning anything? I mean, you could always go for, now I forgot his name, the Cuban down in Florida,